Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing a GeForce RTX 3060 Ti in Starfield. This one is the Founders Edition version of the card. We are running it with the latest Nvidia drivers, and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Ups GPUs. It's also the GDDR6 version of the card, not the X, and resizable bar is enabled. And lastly, over on the left, preparing it with the i5-13600K, overclocked to 5.5 GHz and 32 GB of RAM DDR5 6000 MHz in dual channel. Let's get into it, shall we? Alright everybody, it's time to guess the settings. Comment down below what kind of settings do you think we're utilizing right now. We're getting 50 to 60 frames per second. Sometimes it reaches 60s here. This is also the Atlantis City, one of the most intensive areas in the entire game. And you can actually see like twice the performance in some other areas. So keep that in mind. Yes, the game is not well optimized whatsoever, but in most worlds it's gonna run a lot better than what you see in my videos. Of course though, I am benchmarking GPUs here, so I gotta test it out in a very GPU intensive area, so you see worst case scenario basically. It's a playable experience, but it's a 3060 Ti playing this game at 1080p medium settings with 100% resolution scale, okay? The medium settings preset actually sets the render resolution to 50%, which looks absolutely terrible, but I guess it fools some people into thinking that they're getting really high FPS in comparison to my videos. Well, if that's the case, it's down to the render resolution or where you are in the map. So let's drop it down to low settings and see if we can actually get like 60 plus 100% of the time. I'm also gonna set this to off. Oh, by the way, we're not using FSR2 in this video. It still says FSR2 right here, but I have installed the DLSS 3.5 mod. So whenever we select FSR2, it's actually going to be utilizing DLSS. I'm going to set it to 50% right now so you can see that it looks a lot better than FSR. Right now we're not using any sharpening because you gotta install Reshade to use sharpening with it. So I'm gonna go to the home button and Reshade pops up. I'm gonna select the adaptive sharpen right here. Drops our FPS slightly with the 3060 Ti. It's interesting because with the 4080 it didn't drop whatsoever. But yeah, this looks a lot better than FSR2 using the sharpening from FSR2 inside of the game, you know, which doesn't work whenever you're using the DLSS mod. And it's not like super pixelated anymore like when using FSR2 at 50%. This is actually not terrible looking on a native 1080p monitor especially, and I'm using a 42-inch monitor right here, and it's still passable to me. Anyway, that's enough 540p, right? Let's turn upscaling off and play at native resolution with the low settings preset. And I also disabled the sharpening because it takes away like 2 or 3 frames per second from the 3060 Ti's performance. Anyway, if you are into that native resolution experience, well, it's gonna perform at 60 plus FPS, I guess. Yeah, that's not absolutely awful, right? No, I think it's gonna drop actually. It's in the low 60s already, guys. Oh boy, over here it should drop from 60 frames per second. Is that the case? Come on, 60? That's 60 flat right there, my friends. So maybe low settings actually works pretty well. The bad thing is there are still a couple of scenarios where it drops a little bit more than here. 59 FPS right there. Okay, it's a terrible experience. No, not really. If it drops a couple of times here and there, it's not the end of the world in my opinion. But, you know, 60 FPS with a 3060 Ti is pretty rough, right? Interestingly though, with the 3070, it actually did drop from 60 frames per second at 1080p low settings a few more times than the 3060 Ti here. That's because we're using actual native resolution right now instead of the FSR2 with 100% resolution scaling that I used in that video. I feel like this looks a lot better than native resolution because you got sharpening going on. Of course, this doesn't work without the sharpening from the Reshade, but as you can see, it is indeed a little bit more intensive if you enable DLSS in this case, or FSR in the other case, with 100% scaling. It's drops your FPS by a little bit, but it also makes the image a lot better looking. And right now we're seeing like around 5 less FPS than the 3070, which is accurate. This GPU is around like 10 to 15% slower than the 3070. So it's mostly down into the mid 50s and lower 50s, whereas without the DLSS enabled and the sharpening from reshade, it was getting 60 plus consistently, even here, as you can see. 60, 61. Yeah, so the difference here is not because of a CPU bottleneck with the 5800X 3D that I used with the 3070. It's just because we were using a little bit of sharpening over native resolution on the 3070 video, and that taxes these GPUs quite a bit, you know. I wasn't really expecting to see that big of a difference. But again, I would probably enable that sharpening anyways, because it looked a lot better. Now, with the DLSS mods though, you can make the game look very good still with 66% resolution scale, which is the quality preset for DLSS. And a 1080p DLSS quality basically, with the sharpening enabled. There we go. We're seeing 69. Now sharpening only hit the FPS by 1, actually. Interesting. But yeah, we're seeing FPS above 60 100% of the time. You don't need to worry whatsoever. It's never gonna drop at these settings. But again, it's 1080p low with 66% resolution scaling because of DLSS on a 3060 Ti. That's just unacceptable in my opinion. It's so ridiculous how demanding this game is. And now over here it's only dropping into like the high 60s, low 70s, so it's a good bump up in performance when enabling DLSS. And I'll leave a link down below in the description for a video on how to install the DLSS mod in Starfield. Anyway, let's stop it there. These are the settings that you gotta go with if you want 60 plus FPS all of the time. Yep, 1080p low with DLSS quality. That's absolutely insane. But let's turn it up to medium settings now. I'm going to disable motion blur. I'll disable DLSS right now. And here we have it. FPS are in the 50s right now. Let me just see if the adaptive sharpening does anything. We're getting 59 FPS there. And now turning this off, we're getting 61. Okay, 2 FPS difference here. I mean, it's not going to be noticeable, honestly. If you can, definitely enable some sharpening with reshade. It's totally worth it. It's going to look way better than native resolution without the adaptive sharpening, because it looks really soft, just like every other AAA title that has released this year. They all look super, super soft for some weird reason. It's the TAA. The TAA just ruins everything, I guess. 40-something frames per second. Huge drops here, guys. Look at this. It's getting really intensive for the 3060 Ti. Damn. Okay, still playable though. I've seen a lot of people saying that they can play this game and enjoy it absolutely fine with 30, 40 plus frames per second, you know. And I agree with those people. This is not really that fast-paced of a game. It's, yes, it can be first person, but also third person. It has the shooting mechanics, which will benefit, of course, from 60 plus FPS all of the time. But it's not 100% required to get 60 plus FPS 100% of the time. And at least it doesn't stutter whatsoever, so I value that. That's the experience on medium settings in 1080p. I'm gonna go ahead and enable the DLSS, set it to 66% once again, so it's quality. And of course, we also need the adaptive sharpening, because without it, you don't have any sharpening. Like DLSS uses sharpening by default, but with the mods, you actually need reshade to apply the sharpening part of it. Anyway, we're getting comfortably 60 plus FPS now. Alright, if I start shooting people, they will all disappear, so that's why I'm not really shooting any NPCs here. It actually is slightly more intensive whenever they are running around or walking around like this. So I'll leave them be. Alright, it's dropping from 60 frames per second right now. So once again, it's not the end of the world. It only drops into the high 50s. That's okay. Most of the time it's going to be 60 plus. And remember, once again, you can get up to double the frame rates that you see here in this area in other worlds and other parts of the game, especially interior. You know, those are very, very, very easy to run. And you could say, well optimized. I'm not going to say anything is well optimized in this game, aside from the stuttering. Now let's bump it up to the high settings preset, disable the motion blur, and we're playing with the upscaling off. Anyway, at high settings, things get extremely intensive. It drops down into the 30s, as you can see, and since it's dropping into the 30s, I believe there will be a couple of scenarios like with explosions or spaceships taking off with a lot of particle effects, smoke effects, fire effects, and so on, where it is actually going to dip into the 20s. Things can get very intensive. They can get very easy to run, but they also can get a little bit more intensive than what we're seeing here. And with 40-something frames per second, I don't think I would recommend this experience, honestly, guys, especially with the drops into the 30s. It's still playable, but it gets a little bit too choppy for my taste. So at the high settings, you definitely need some DLSS. Let's do it at 66% once again. Let's see. Yeah, that's very soft. We need the sharpening as well. There we go. I really don't recommend you to just install the mod. You need reshade as well, because otherwise, again, it's going to be DLSS, but without the sharpening part of it. And that's an essential part to it, right? Alright, start counting our FPS. Still not enough for 60 FPS. Not even on average, dude. I thought it was going to perform a little bit better than this. Like, before I knew that the optimization is terrible in this game, I would say that we would get these FPS at 1440p high settings with the 3060 Ti. And you know what? After seeing the actual graphics of the game, I would even tell you that we could get 100 FPS at 1440p high settings. But no, what we're running here is 66% of 1080p using DLSS to upscale that, which, again, still looks very good. And high settings. Like, what the heck? Alright guys, now we're playing at 1080p ultra settings preset without the motion blur and without the resolution scale. So it's native res, and it's getting 33, 35 over here. Yeah, I think that's a little bit worse than what we saw with the RTX 3070, maybe? But not that big of a difference here, really. Yeah, it's not really dropping from 30 frames per second, so it should be an alright experience. And once again, with 3070, I was using FSR sharpening on top of the native resolution, so it was slightly more intensive once again. Here we are just using the native res without sharpening, which looks pretty blurry. But yeah, I guess you could play like this if you really, really wanted ultra settings, and all you care about is ultra settings, and you don't care about getting 30 FPS. In fact, if you lock it to 30 FPS, maybe add motion blur, play with a controller, it would be a console experience, because they're all locked to 30. So yeah, there we go. Even here, it's getting 33, 34. Not terrible, 32. Again, it will drop from 30, though, in spaceships taking off and stuff like that. Very intensive scenarios with a lot of particle effects. But yeah, for the most part, 99% of the time, you're gonna get 30 plus. I guess this means that enabling DLSS on quality will give us, like, what, 35 plus? It doesn't really make that much of a difference. Now we're in the 40s more often than in the 30s, but I mean, it might not be night and day, but you know what? 45 FPS that we're hitting right now are feeling a lot smoother than 30, that's for sure. So yeah, definitely enable quality DLSS, my friend. 66% is the value for quality, or 67%. It's actually 66.6%. So maybe we should do 67 instead of 66. Doesn't matter. It's gonna look the same and perform exactly the same. It's 1% value on the resolution scale, right? It really does not matter whatsoever. Getting 40 right here, 38. Once again, it's a 3060 Ti. It's only good for 30 FPS at ultra settings, 1080p. I would have liked to see a bigger difference with DLSS enabled or FSR enabled as well. Like with Remnant 2, that was terribly optimized as well. It was super intensive at native resolution, but you got like maybe 50%, sometimes 80% more FPS just by enabling DLSS quality. Whereas in this one, you get what? Like 20%? Yeah, it's not gonna change your experience completely like it does in Remnant 2. Still a great addition though, and I would definitely enable it with a 3060 Ti or any other RTX GPU. Even on the 48, it looked really good with the sharpening on as well, and it makes the game a little bit better in terms of frame rates. We're now at 50% resolution scale, guys, or performance DLSS, and that's good for us to achieve like 50 maybe at the maximum. Yep, there we go, 50 FPS right there, 51, 52. We've not reached 60 previously at quality DLSS, but yeah, it's still in the 40s very often. Over here, 44, 45, 42. I mean, this is a little bit too low of a resolution right now. It's 540p internally, so I wouldn't really do this. Quality is where it's at. That's the sweet spot here for the Nvidia GPUs. I mean, 80% looked really good with FSR2, but I think 66% looks very similar to that. Quality is definitely the way to go, my friends. There we go. 44, 45. Yeah, from quality to performance, 66% to 50%, we didn't really see that big of a difference in FPS, right? Like 46, 45, and now dropping it down to 50%, we get 49. Yeah, that's a ridiculously low improvement for the resolution drop that we're seeing here, so don't play on performance, okay? Let's turn this off now, turn it down to low. Damn it, gotta turn it off again. And I'm gonna restart the game and apply 1440p resolution. Here we go, 2560 by 1440 is now the res at the native, okay? And I already disabled the adaptive sharpening as well. We're getting 40 something frames per second at native resolution. But again, it just looks really soft, man. Even at 1440p without any sharpening. I'm gonna try like CAS over here, because DLSS only replaces FSR2. It definitely does not replace CAS. I can still see the noisy image sometimes in some areas of the picture here from FSR or CAS. The upscaling from AMD basically. But yeah, it still looks a lot better than native resolution. Native was just soft. Here you get a little bit of noise in the picture, but it's not the end of the world. It's playable, it's just not that great, and it's low settings as well, so I'd rather play at a lower resolution if you have a 1080p monitor, of course. Like, if you have 1080p monitor, there's no need for you to use, like, DSR and stuff like that and play at 1440p. Let's try it with upscaling now. DLSS set to 66%. There we go. Whoa, we're getting 60s. Oh, we're back to the 60s. It feels so smooth, guys. It feels so smooth. I am so happy to be back to the 60s. I forgot how smooth this was. Oh, yes. And you can have it as well. Just install the DLSS mod and play like this. It's gonna look really good. It's gonna be 60 plus most of the time. It's gonna drop here and there still at low settings, which is insane. But hey, if it comforts you, the low settings in this game don't really look that different from Ultra. You know? And medium certainly looks very similar to Ultra settings in this one. Also, I'm sorry about my voice. Sometimes it might crack and stuff because I'm getting sick at the moment. I'm getting sick of this game, that's it. I'm kidding, I'm actually getting sick. Right, 55 FPS sometimes. Yeah, again, it's not the end of the world. It definitely feels a lot smoother than what we saw at native resolution. So there's that. I wouldn't really have a major problem playing like this. But again, it's not 60 plus FPS and it's low settings. Now 50% gives us a good bump in performance. And it doesn't look terrible. That's the thing, like with FSR2 on 50%, it was still impressive what it could do. Because it didn't look like 50% of 1440p or 1080p resolution whatsoever. But it was very soft, it has a lot of ghosting as well. DLSS doesn't. It might be a little bit pixelated. Yeah, you can clearly see like those edges over there. They're pixelated if I stop the camera right now. Ooh, and this wood thing over there is also very pixelated if I stop this. Yeah, some things are very pixelated, but if you're moving around, shooting things, all you care about is getting 60 plus FPS. It is very passable still, even with 50% resolution scale. And it's enough to put us above 60 FPS at 1440p, which I thought wouldn't happen in this video. Now let's try it on medium with no motion blur and native resolution. Is gonna be very bad. Or not, actually. It isn't really... okay, it's in the 30s now. You know what? I myself would prefer 45 plus FPS all of the time. That's what I would aim for. Maybe 60 even, but... yeah, that's probably the best balance between visuals and performance, you know, 40 FPS in this game with the 3060 Ti. Alright, I think we can forget about, like, high settings at native res, right? Like, this is gonna be terrible, probably. No, it's kind of the same. It's gonna drop from 30, though. Yeah, this is not good. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to medium and set it to 66% resolution scale. And now it looks identical to what we saw at native resolution. And instead of getting 30-ish FPS, we're getting like 10 plus more FPS. And that's good enough to make all of the difference in terms of the smoothness. It's still not perfect because it still drops from like 45. And as I told you, I'd like 45 plus 100% of the time. But hey, it is feeling a heck of a lot smoother, and in some areas you can even achieve 60s, 70s. Like for example, inside of here, it should be very easy to run. Yeah, that's the case. Look at how the lighting changes just by getting inside of the little area here, little building. So weird. Also, that's a little bit creepy. Okay, let's continue. I also hate the green tint that this game has. I think with reshade you should be able to adjust that and make it look a lot better as well in terms of colors. Let's do high, 66% once again. Right, it's only slightly more intensive than medium, I guess. Let's go to the more intensive area over there and look down at the city from above with the vegetation and stuff. 42, 41. Dropping slightly more here with DLSS quality, but it's almost the same experience, you know. It's very, very similar. We lost like 3 or 4 frames compared to medium. If you disable the FPS counter, I doubt anybody's gonna tell the difference in smoothness comparing medium to high with this GPU. Let's try it on ultra now. Disable that motion blur again. And ultra settings, native 1440p is getting us 30, so that means that it's definitely going to drop from 30 FPS, just like it did on high. Yeah, okay, even here it's touching 30 FPS, so of course over there it would drop. So this is definitely not ideal. 29 right there. Yeah, I wouldn't do this, guys, okay? Now with DLSS quality and 1440p, alright, yeah, 40s, 30s. Still a bit rough, honestly, guys. You gotta stick to high or lower in this one. If you want ultra, 1080p with DLSS is okay, but where it shines the most and where the sweet spot is definitely at like medium or high settings with DLSS and at 1080p or 1440. Let's go ahead and do low settings. I'm gonna disable this and play at 4K just on low. Okay, let's just disable the sharpening here on ultra, which didn't really make a difference. Maybe we got like 1 more FPS. But yeah, this is the experience on low settings and the 4K resolution, as you can see. You know what's really weird? Motion blur is disabled, but I can still see a lot of motion blur. It's not the low FPS causing that, but it's off right there. Like if I set it to high, yeah, there's more motion blur, but if I disable it completely, there shouldn't be... Now it's disabled. Okay. Okay. Well, it was just broken. The menu is broken. The settings are broken. The game is broken. Everything is broken. What the hell? Sometimes I have the motion blur disabled and I can still see a lot of motion blur, and I was wondering what the hell, why doesn't it disable? Well, it turns out sometimes you gotta double check, literally. Okay, all right, anyways, getting 30 FPS average at 4K low with a lot of drops into the 20s, so not good. But the thing is, enabling the DLSS on quality at 4K actually does look really good. Yeah, that's really sharp after applying the sharpening as well. And now we're in the 40s, getting those sweet 45-ish FPS average. So if you want to lock it to like, what, 35? That's probably our minimum here. You can have a 35 locked FPS experience all of the time at 4K graphical fidelity. It's not really 4K because it's 66% right now, but it does look very, very similar to native resolution. I guess it's going to be playable at the 4K resolution as long as you install DLSS or use FSR, but again, FSR is going to look a lot worse. And with 50% resolution scaling, which makes the internal resolution at 1080p, it's at 50 FPS. It's not terrible, once again. Now you can lock it to like 40 or 45 and achieve those FPS locked through the entire gameplay experience in Starfield. At the distance you can see a bit of shimmering here and there, but there's no major pixelation, no major softness. Actually, it's not soft at all. It just lacks a little bit more detail than it did at quality. But it is not bad whatsoever, guys. This is actually a very compelling option. Oh, look at that. Somebody's playing Battlefront 2, a game that looks 10 times better than this one and performs like 5 times better as well. Anyway, that's been it for this one, my friends. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it was informative and helpful. Remember, you're gonna get way higher FPS outside of this big city right here. So keep that in mind. This is worst case scenario or close to it. And, well, if you want to buy Starfield with 3060 Ti, I guess go for it. It's gonna work. It's not the best experience in the world, but it works. Catch you in the next one very soon, and as always, love you all. Bye-bye.